Why do these alien beasts fear two children? The terrifying truth behind their powers. They had chosen Aric Hale because he was human, not Aurelian, not bound by their clan rivalries, and not subject to the subtle political strings that could compromise an escort mission. Humans were rare in the frontier, but their reputation, stubborn under pressure, unpredictable in combat, made him the ideal safeguard for an envoy whose failure could fracture the interstellar accord. The frontier was a place where treaties had no gravity. Pirate fleets, rogue mercenary bands, and bioengineered predators could appear without warning. Out here, law was measured in plasma output, not statutes. The diplomatic convoy was small, two Aurelian dignitaries in shimmering opaline robes, several aides, security detachments of ceremonial guards, and the most delicate cargo, twin girls, Aaron and Sori, cloaked in silver academy uniforms. Their destination was the Moon Citadel, seat of the Aurelian High Council, where an agreement was to be signed sealing their alliance. Aric's armor was not ceremonial. He wore gray ceramic fiber combat plates, adaptive HUD visor, and a coil rifle magnetically locked to his back. Around his belt, compact shock batons and emergency breaching tools, because in the frontier, you prepared for things going wrong, not right. The attack came 6 hours into the transit, in the quiet stretch between beacons. The Skath Corsairs struck when the convoy's transponders were masked by a nearby pulsar flare. Perfect timing to avoid long-range scans. Their ships were angular, organic-looking hulls sheened in black chitin, armed with particle scythes and flak projectors. The first volley punched through the lead escort's shields before the convoy's AI even parsed the threat. The warning sirens lagged behind reality. Aric's first sensation was not sound, but the vibration through deck plating, a deep, resonant shudder as kinetic rounds bit into the hull. He was already moving before orders came, scanning the tactical overlay, calling for defensive spread formation. But in the corner of his display, a proximity alert blinked red in an auxiliary corridor. That was where Aaron and Sori had been sent minutes earlier, escorted by a junior aide to retrieve some personal belongings before arrival. The aide had fled when the first impacts hit. The girls hadn't. He found them in the auxiliary storage compartment, the door jammed half open by twisted plating. Sori's pale hair clung to her cheeks. Aaron's eyes, those strange bioluminescent irises, tracked him without fear, only measured curiosity. They were too calm for children in a pirate boarding scenario, and that was unsettling in its own way. There was no time to wait for reinforcements. The corridor's security feeds showed Skath breaching pods on approach. If he called for backup, the pirates might cut through before help arrived. So he went alone, forcing the door open with a breacher's pry and scooping both girls into the crook of his armored arms. Breaking formation meant the convoy's defense line would have a gap. Any tactician knew that. But letting the twins fall into Skath's hands was worse than losing a gunship. He didn't yet know why they mattered so much, only that they did. And in the frontier, instinct kept you alive longer than protocol. The escape pod was no elegant craft, just a reinforced drop capsule, hull layered with ablative ceramics and shock gel buffering. It was built to keep occupants alive through impact, not to make the ride pleasant. Aric sealed Aaron and Sori inside, strapping them into the crash couches. The pod's AI chirped coldly. Ejection route plotted. Atmospheric entry in 6 minutes. "We're not going back to the convoy?" Sori asked, voice tight but steady. "There's no going back," Aric said, locking the hatch. "We reach the surface, we survive. That's the mission now." Caldera IX was the only viable option, a green and blue marble on his charts, close enough for a ballistic drop. The other planets in range were barren rock or toxic storms. This one had a breathable atmosphere, but it was also uncharted, flagged as xeno ecology high hazard. Halfway through descent, the pod's guidance thrusters coughed and died. A damage report flashed across the console. Debris from the initial attack had jammed the vectoring fins. They were going in hot. The twins stayed quiet as the pod disengaged from the convoy's hull. Through the small viewport, the ship behind them grew smaller, its running lights flashing in chaotic patterns as the battle raged. Aaron tilted her head toward him. "You've done this before." "Too many times," he replied. "That's why we'll land in one piece." As they pierced the upper atmosphere, Caldera IX revealed itself, vast stretches of emerald forest broken by silver rivers, clouds casting shadows across terrain like moving continents. The sky was a pale violet, streaked with high-altitude crystal formations refracting light into shimmering bands. There were no visible cities, no orbital beacons, only wilderness. The heat shield glowed red-white, shaking the pod with every atmospheric buffer they hit. Aric braced one hand against the bulkhead, the other on the manual stabilizer. "When we hit," he said over the roar, "I want you both to stay strapped in until I say otherwise. No heroics." "Noted," Sori muttered. Aaron just nodded, eyes fixed on the violet horizon. The final drop was blind. The clouds were thick, wet with static charge that made the displays fuzz. Then they punched through and the forest came into view, an unbroken canopy of luminous leaves, their edges pulsing faintly as if breathing. They struck hard. The pod gouged a furrow through undergrowth, came to rest wedged between massive root structures taller than houses. The air outside shimmered faintly, and Aric understood why they called this place living. The trees weren't just swaying in wind, they adjusted their branches toward the pod, tendrils curling in exploratory arcs. When the hatch blew, a humid, earthy scent poured in, rich with spores that glittered in the pod light. Something in the undergrowth clicked and shifted away from them. "Stay close," Aric ordered, stepping out with coil rifle ready. The ground was soft, springing under his boots like muscle. His first goal was clear: find high ground, set a perimeter, and get a signal out before anything living decided they were prey. "Where do we go?" Aaron asked, stepping onto the breathing soil. "Up," Aric said, scanning the dense, glowing forest. "Always up. Gives you time to see trouble coming." Night on Caldera IX did not fall. It bled in, a slow dimming of the violet sky until the canopy above was just a breathing black mass. Aric had rigged a small perimeter with flares and a coil rifle rest. The twins huddled in a shallow alcove between root walls. The first sound was like crystal chimes carried on a low wind. Then the shapes appeared, angular bodies refracting what little light there was, like wolves made of fractured glass. Their eyes glowed a pale aquamarine, and their movements were both animal and eerily deliberate. They formed a loose circle, pacing just outside the flare light. Aric could feel the hair on his neck rise, predators testing range. He realized quickly why they had come. It wasn't the pod, it was the twins. Whenever one of the girls shifted or whispered, the beast would angle closer, as if drawn by some unseen tether. On a planet whose life form seemed to breathe in rhythm with itself, this could not be coincidence. The chimes grew louder, joined by a faint shimmer in the air, like heat haze made of light. That was the only warning before the first beast lunged. Aric's coil rifle spat a white-blue bolt, shattering its head into shards that scattered like gemstones across the ground. "Stay low," he barked, pivoting to track another moving in from the left. His rifle wasn't infinite. Each shot burned precious charge, so he switched to shock batons when they pressed closer, striking at joints and driving them back into the dark. He used the terrain like a second weapon, forcing the beast to funnel between roots, dropping deadfall branches into choke points, bouncing light from flares to blind them temporarily. Years in special operations had taught him to listen for absence, not presence. When the chimes went silent in one direction, it meant they were shifting for a flank. That instinct kept him ahead of their assaults, but hours of constant movement wore him thin. His muscles burned, armor plates heavy with humidity and crystal dust. The twins didn't just cower. Sori called out positions, eyes sharp in the dark. Aaron lobbed flare sticks to break up the beast's approach patterns. They moved with an odd synchronicity, as if each knew what the other would do before doing it. By dawn, the ground around them glittered. The bodies of the beast were gone, only fragments of glass remained, slowly melting into the soil until the earth drank them completely. Whether it was biology or something stranger, Aric couldn't tell. But it felt like the forest reclaiming its own. The girls were pale but steady. Sori finally asked, "They came because of us, didn't they?" Aric didn't answer immediately. He was still watching the soil where the shards had vanished. If these creatures were tied to the planet's living network, and that network reacted to the twins, then survival here would mean more than fighting predators. It would mean understanding why the planet itself seemed to know them. And he had the sinking feeling that the answer would change everything. The rescue ship cut through the violet haze like a shard of light, its hull lined with gold-veined plating that caught the sun and flung it back in blinding arcs. When the hatch opened, Lyra Kayla stepped down the ramp. She was taller than Aric expected, her opaline skin shifting in hue with each movement, hair like poured silver flowing down to ceremonial armor inlaid with faint luminescence. Every gesture radiated authority, the kind born of a ruler used to both command and scrutiny. That she was here herself told Aric enough. A high regent of the Aurelian high houses did not leave the citadel unless the matter was vital. Her voice carried over the clearing, calm but with an undercurrent of urgency. Aaron, sorry. The twins broke into sudden smiles, something Aric had not seen in days, and ran to her. She knelt to embrace them, one hand cupping each luminous face, whispering words in Aurelian too soft for him to catch. When she straightened, her gaze met his without hesitation. You have my thanks, Commander Hale, she said, and then, almost without pause, you will accompany us back to the Citadel immediately. Your presence will be required. It wasn't a request. From above, Nguyet Than was a vast crown of light resting in the curve of the moon's inner bay. Tower spires of crystal and living stone rose in organic spirals, each threaded with flowing streams that shimmered like molten silver in the daylight. The city's domed plazas were veiled in translucent membranes that shifted color with the weather. From orbit, it was beautiful. From a tactical view, it was a fortress disguised as art. Layered shield grids, hidden rail emplacements, and a fleet of interceptor drones hovered at the periphery like patient falcons. The city was the political heart of the Aurelian realm. Every treaty, every war, every alliance touched its halls before spreading to the stars. Walking through its high causeways, Aric felt the subtle pressure of being an outsider in the core of another civilization's power. The air carried a faint floral scent, almost manufactured, and the light inside the great halls seemed too perfect, adjusted for effect rather than function. It was in those polished corridors that Aric first noticed it again. The twins moved through the city as if they knew its rhythms already, pausing at certain windows, touching the smooth crystal walls as if listening. In the reflection of a mirrored arch, he caught a faint ripple of light following their steps, like the pulse he had seen in Caldera's forest floor. A pair of Aurelian guards whispered as he passed, "The Kong Huang are home again." The word was unfamiliar, but the tone was reverent and uneasy. That night he asked Lyra directly, "They're connected to Caldera IX, aren't they?" "That's why the creatures came." Her expression was unreadable. "Some bonds are older than records, Commander. The less you disturb them, the safer we all are." It was meant as reassurance, but to Aric, it sounded like a warning. If the twins could stir the life of an entire planet, then in the wrong hands they could be as dangerous as any fleet in the galaxy. The chamber was not carved, but grown, a hollow at the base of the citadel, where the air was thick with the scent of wet soil and ozone. In the center rose Root Heart, the Root Heart. It was a lattice of living roots fused with translucent crystal veins, each glowing from within with slow, deliberate pulses of light. The structure reached upward beyond sight, threading into the heart of the moon itself. Seeing it with his own eyes was like standing inside the nervous system of a world. The light was not steady, it shifted subtly, reacting to movement, to breath, to thought. Standing too close made the hairs on his arms lift, as though his body recognized something alien and ancient. Only the High Regent, the High Council, and those bound by the blood oath were allowed within the chamber. That Aric was here at all meant he had been pulled deeper into Aurelian trust, or politics, than he had planned. "It listens," Lyra said beside him, her voice hushed. "And it remembers." The one who explained more was not Lyra, but Iselvar. In a quiet corner of the chamber, she leaned close. "It reacts to the twins," she whispered, "their emotions. When they fear, it defends. You've seen its work." He had on Caldera IX. when the glass beast came. Isel showed him a holorecord from that night. Energy readings spiking in sync with the girl's stress levels. Biosignature overlays aligning perfectly with the root heart's pulses. The creatures it created did not die in the normal sense. When their task ended, they dissolved into raw crystal and rejoined the root lattice, as if they had only been borrowed from the planet's body. "Why not tell me this sooner?" Aric asked. "Because uncontrolled, it's a weapon without restraint," Isel replied. "One surge of terror, and it could fill this city with predators." He pictured scenarios, an assassination attempt, a public panic, even a nightmare in the wrong place, and saw the result, a massacre in Nuyet-Tan's crowded halls. "Can they be calmed?" he asked. "Music helps, familiar voices, but the link is deeper than comfort. They have to choose to be still." That was the problem. Choice could be unpredictable. Aric made his decision then. He would shadow the twins whenever they left the Citadel, train them if possible to keep their emotions in check, and keep them away from any situation where fear could be exploited. If the root heart could birth monsters from a child's heartbeat, then keeping those heartbeats steady might be the only way to keep an entire city alive. Isel Var had the posture of someone who belonged in marble council halls, not shadowed corners, but Aric had learned in the frontier that appearances were another kind of armor. She was Lyra's diplomatic aide, officially tasked with protocol and scheduling. Unofficially, she kept her ears open where Lyra's presence might silence tongues. She had helped him once before, during the Skath attack, directing his comms link through a jamming field so he could reach the evac bay. That alone had earned some trust. She approached him in the Citadel's archive cloister, handing over a thin holoslate. "Encrypted manifests, private transfers from Morenvale's accounts to Skath Corsair fronts," she murmured. "They routed it through shell traders on the rim, but the timing matches the attack on your convoy." "How did you get this?" Aric asked, scanning the data. "I maintain back channels with trade inspectors. They think I'm doing background vetting for diplomatic envoys," she said with a faint, humorless smile. The logs were damning, shipments labeled as mineral rights that were really weapons-grade isotopes, payment schedules aligning with Skath fleet movements. It meant Vale had not only hired the Corsairs but also armed them for the strike. "Why bring this to me?" Aric asked. "Because you're not tied to any house," she replied. "You'll see the truth for what it is, not what's convenient to your faction." Morin Vale was a high lord of one of the oldest Aurelian houses, his crest still carved into the original foundation stones of the Citadel. His opposition to the Aurelian-Terran alliance was no secret. He viewed humans as useful soldiers, but dangerous allies. His relationship with Lyra was complicated. They had once shared a political bloc, but when she began pushing for interstellar integration, Vale broke ranks. His personal fleet was large enough to blockade a moon, but avert action against the Citadel would be treason. That was why he'd chosen the Skath, expendable, deniable, and feared for their brutality. Aric decided to dig deeper, but quietly. A direct accusation could fracture the High Council before proof was undeniable. His plan was to intercept one of Vale's supply runs and trace it to the Skath rendezvous point, gathering evidence without tipping his hand. Isel would serve as his primary contact inside the Citadel, feeding him movement data. He'd also lean on a small circle of Aurelian guards he'd worked with during the rescue on Caldera IX, men and women who had seen enough to question official narratives. The risks were sharp-edged. Vale's intelligence network reached into every house guard. If Aric moved too obviously, the operation could be cut off before it began, or worse, turned back on him in the council chambers. And if Vale caught him in the act, there would be no formal arrest. Just a disappearance explained away as another casualty of the frontier. Lyra Hale, calm yet firm, extended an offer that Aric couldn't ignore. "I'm offering you the blood oath," she said, her voice steady as always. The blood oath was not a simple gesture. It was a lifelong vow of service to the Aurelian High House. Aric understood its weight. Those who accepted it were bound, body and soul, to protect the house and its leadership, no matter the cost. The offer was more than political, it was personal. Lyra was not just the High Regent of Aurelian. She had grown to trust Aric deeply. He wasn't a native, nor was he swayed by political intrigue. He was an outsider who had proven his loyalty, a soldier, and a protector. But the blood oath required more than loyalty. It required a sacrifice of freedom, a binding promise to give up one's personal life for the cause of the Aurelian people. Aric was no stranger to duty, but the thought of binding himself in such a way felt heavy. "And what do you ask in return?" he questioned, meeting her gaze. "To stand by me," Lyra responded, her expression softening for the first time. "To protect my children, to be the guardian. This will be your life's work." The symbolism of the ritual was clear. Blood shed in the light of Roothart's roots, signifying an eternal bond between the warrior and the Aurelian house. It wasn't just a ceremonial act, it was a deep, sacred oath. Aric would become part of their family, bound not by blood, but by honor. Despite his hesitation, Aric understood the necessity. He would be Lyra's guardian, not just her protector, but a symbol of Aurelian's survival against the forces threatening them. Yet he wasn't naive. He knew the political stakes. This wasn't just about loyalty to a person. It was about a fragile balance of power that could tip at any moment. Still, Aric's resolve hardened. "If I accept, I need the freedom to uncover the truth about Vale. I can't fight for you, Lyra, without knowing everything." Lyra's gaze turned thoughtful, then steely. "I understand, but remember, once you take this oath, you will be bound by it. Your actions will be for the good of the Aurelian people. No more, no less." With that, Aric agreed. The blood oath was accepted. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that this new responsibility would reveal even darker truths, especially about Lyra's own role in the unfolding conflict. Morinvale's plan was set in motion with chilling precision. He had secretly mobilized a mercenary army, recruiting from rogue factions, pirates, and disgruntled Aurelian forces. Aric's worst fears were confirmed when Isel provided him with intelligence, showing that Vale had orchestrated the attack on the Citadel to disrupt the Blood Oath ceremony. Vale wasn't just aiming to kill Lyra, he was using the chaos to assassinate the leadership of Aurelian and eliminate the Terran influence once and for all. The Skath Corsairs, hired by Vale, were the unpredictable element in his scheme. The Corsairs had infiltrated the Citadel's lower levels, using the ongoing unrest to slip past security and strike at key locations. Aric knew the city like the back of his hand and immediately began formulating a plan. He would need to move quickly, gathering his loyal forces, cutting off Vale's mercenaries, and ensuring the twins were safe from the impending chaos. Isel urgently reached out to Aric, sending him the timing of the attack. "They'll strike before the first flare of the ceremony. Vale's men are already in position," she warned. With no time to waste, Aric began preparing his defense, contacting the loyal guards who still remained hidden in the shadows of the Citadel. They would need to act fast, moving in small groups to avoid detection and clear the mercenaries before the full-scale assault began. Aric also knew he couldn't rely solely on his military forces. He needed to control the power of the Roothart. As the ceremony began and the tension in the city rose, Roothart pulsed in response. The twins, now more attuned to the roots, began to sense the imminent danger. The Roothart itself seemed to recognize the escalating situation, and the tension between them and the planet's energy grew palpable. The situation was more dangerous than ever. Aric had to move fast. But if the twins' emotions triggered the full force of Roothart, everything could spiral out of control. With Vale's mercenaries in the city and the Roothart's power at stake, Aric was now trapped between two deadly forces, one human, one ancient. The ceremony was in full swing when the first explosion rocked the Citadel. The blast was followed by a rain of debris, and the protective force field that encased the Blood Oath chamber flickered erratically before failing altogether. The mercenaries, led by Vale's men, had breached the perimeter with precision, bypassing the primary security grid by using explosives and ion disruptors. A secondary squad, hidden among the guest procession, opened fire on the ceremonial guards. The crowd, noble houses, foreign diplomats, and Aurelian civilians panicked, scattering in every direction, creating chaos in the elegant halls. The air turned to static, the atmosphere thick with fear and confusion. Women screamed as soldiers fired overhead, and children ducked behind their parents. It was a massacre waiting to happen. Lyra stood at the platform, composed but rigid. She was the target, and everyone knew it. Her voice rang out, calm and unwavering, commanding the remaining guard units to form a perimeter and hold the lines. She didn't flinch when an Aurelian soldier fell to the floor, a black-marked wound on his chest. "Keep moving! Protect the civilians!" she shouted to the aides. Her eyes flicked toward Aric, who had instinctively moved to intercept a group of attackers trying to reach the twins. Aric's focus was razor-sharp. He shoved Aaron and Sori into a nearby alcove, blocking the exit with his body as blasts echoed around them. His rifle was out, and his hands were steady, though his heart raced. He barked orders to the remaining guards, directing them into positions to force the attackers into choke points. The sound of clashing weapons, the hiss of plasma fire, and the scream of battle were all around him, but he stayed focused. "Stay down, both of you," Aric ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. He positioned himself between them and the attackers, using his body as a shield. "You're not leaving this alcove unless I say so. Do you understand?" Aaron, her wide eyes full of both fear and determination, nodded. Sori, hands clenched, kept her gaze fixed on the chaos outside. Aric could see the pulse of Root-Heart flicker faintly beneath the floor, its light reacting to the heightened stress in the room. It wasn't long before the first of the twists emerged. Amid the gunfire and panic, Aric received a transmission from Izel, a single line of encrypted text that would change everything. Veil's test of the blood oath. It was meant to be a trial. You were always the experiment, Aric, not the protector. The truth hit him like a cold slap. Lyra had orchestrated this entire situation, but not in the way he had thought. The blood oath wasn't just an honor. It was a trap. Veil had learned about the ritual and decided to turn it into his advantage. Lyra had knowingly doused the ceremony with danger, using the attack as a way to identify a true protector who would sacrifice everything for the family. Aric was part of a game he had never consented to. He was the pawn in her plan. Aric's stomach turned as he realized how deeply he had been manipulated. He wanted to confront her, demand answers, but the moment was wrong. The fight wasn't over. He had a job to do, and the lives of the twins depended on him seeing it through. As Aric reeled from the revelation, the real horror began to unfold. The Root-Heart, which had been pulsing erratically beneath the citadel, suddenly erupted. A massive, monstrous form tore its way out from the ground, a creature born of roots and crystal, towering over the defenders. Its body was translucent, like glass, but the veins running through it pulsed with a malevolent red glow. The creature's eyes, multiple and set like jagged stones, fixed on the nearest target, Lyra. With a guttural roar, it charged. The ground trembled beneath its massive weight as its tendrils lashed out, destroying everything in their path. The air was thick with the sound of cracking stone and the screech of shattering glass. The first soldiers to meet the creature were torn apart in seconds, their bodies ensnared by the creature's spiked limbs. Crushed under the weight of its monstrous form, it surged forward, smashing through the guards, knocking the walls aside as if they were made of paper. Aric knew they had mere moments to stop the creature, or the entire citadel would be destroyed. He dove forward, instinctively heading for the control systems embedded beneath the chamber. His plan was simple. Stall the creature, keep it occupied, while the guards pulled the civilians to safety. But he had no illusions. The Root-Heart's power, tied to the twins' emotional states, had slipped beyond control. "Hold on, Aaron! Sorry!" he shouted as he sprinted toward the control panel. The twins were still huddled in their alcove, watching the nightmare unfold. But Aric knew the creature would turn on them if their fear reached its peak. He had to stop it before the twins' emotions turned the monster into something even worse. With a final sprint, Aric activated the emergency control, hoping that somehow he could stabilize the Root-Heart and bring the creature back into control before it could wipe them all out. The fate of the Citadel, and possibly the entire Aurelian cause, now rested in his hands. The ancient halls of Nguyatan weren't just beautiful, they were built with secrets. The city was a labyrinth of tunnels, forgotten corridors, and hidden passages used by its founders to escape invasion, and later by the nobility to maintain their privacy. Aric, well-versed in navigating hostile terrain, knew the city like the back of his hand. He chose a path that cut through the city's older sections, areas that few civilians or even guards frequented. These routes were narrow, winding, and often obscured by high walls and layers of moss-covered stone. His first decision was to avoid the main roads, which were now swarming with Vale's mercenaries and the scattered remnants of the palace guard. Instead, he steered the twins down a narrow alley, entering a forgotten plaza that had once been a garden, but now resembled a crypt, covered in ivy and silence. Aric's mind worked quickly. The mercenaries were still in the open, unaware of the labyrinth below. The deeper they went, the less likely they'd be detected. Aaron and Sori kept pace without question, though Aric could see the strain in their faces. Sori, always quick to act, kept her eyes ahead, but Aaron seemed more aware of the city's pulse. Her hand brushed against the stone walls and the air shimmered faintly around them. Aric felt the energy rise around them, but he kept moving. The twins had a connection to the city's living network, and right now the best thing he could do was keep them calm. "Stay close," he ordered. "Stay quiet. Let me guide you." The city itself seemed to hold its breath as Aric led them further into its underbelly. The mercenaries had no idea where they had gone, and Aric's choice of path provided the perfect cover. The narrow spaces, low ceilings, and sudden drops gave him the advantage. Vale's soldiers were trained for open combat, not urban guerrilla tactics. Every corner was a potential trap, and Aric's mind raced, calculating each move before it happened. As they rounded a corner, the harsh shriek of blaster fire echoed through the corridor. The sound was too close. Aric's instincts kicked in. Skath Corsairs had somehow infiltrated the city's lower districts, their insectoid forms easily blending into the shadows. They had managed to slip past security, using the chaos of the attack as cover. The Skath had come prepared. Their weapons were sleek and deadly, designed for swift, brutal kills. They carried plasma sabers and disruptor pistols, their long limbs making them difficult to target in the tight corridors. As the first Skath appeared, Aric didn't hesitate. He drew his own coil rifle, firing a quick shot that disintegrated the nearest Corsair's arm. Another lunged, but Aric ducked under its reach, slamming a baton into its midsection, sending it stumbling back. The noise of the fight escalated, and the alleyway felt too small for their chaotic movements. Aric knew he couldn't keep fighting here. As more Skath appeared, he was forced into a desperate sprint, trying to outpace the deadly pursuers. But it wasn't just him. Aaron and Sori were with him, their breaths fast but steady. Sori moved with surprising agility, her hands flicking to create makeshift barricades from fallen debris, while Aaron whispered something in an unknown language that seemed to slow the movement of one of the Skath. Just as the fight seemed to reach its peak, a familiar face emerged from the shadows, Isel. She darted forward with a small group of guards loyal to Lyra, their weapons raised. Together they cleared a path through the Skath, pushing the Corsairs back long enough for Aric and the twins to break free. "This way!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the din of battle. Aric nodded in thanks, though the rush of the escape left him little time for conversation. They had to keep moving. He led them down a final series of winding tunnels, his mind still focused on the immediate goal, the root of Rootheart. Deep beneath the city's core, hidden from Vale's forces, was the last sanctuary, the very root system that connected the life of the city to the living heart of the planet. This was where it had all begun. The tunnels were ancient, built long before the current rulers of Aurelian ever thought to claim the land. Only a few of the city's oldest engineers and mystics knew about them, and even fewer dared to explore them. The roots themselves had the power to stabilize Rootheart, connecting it to the planet's bioluminescent web. Aric had chosen this path for a reason. It was the safest place he could think of where they could regroup and defend themselves. The further they descended, the air grew thicker, the walls alive with the pulse of the roots. Aric could feel the sensation of something watching him, a deep, ancient force that had been here far longer than he could fathom. He could feel Rootheart's presence, almost like a whisper in the back of his mind. "Stay close," he said once more, as the walls around them shimmered in the dim light. "This is our only safe place now." The roots stretched above them like a vast living cathedral, their luminous veins pulsating softly in the dark. As they moved deeper, Aric knew they had entered a place not just of sanctuary, but of power. Rootheart itself was alive in here, And if the twins could calm it, it could be the key to saving them all. Aric's discovery came unexpectedly. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but rather a quiet unraveling of the threads he had been noticing for days. He'd always thought something about Aaron and Sori felt off, a sense that was difficult to explain, but it was in the quiet moments, when their eyes lingered on objects with too much familiarity, or when their words rang out with a certain eerie echo, that the questions began to form. He knew they were important to Lyra, but the bond they shared, the way they seemed to understand things beyond their years, it wasn't natural. It couldn't be. He wasn't a scientist, but his training had taught him to notice anomalies. It started with the twins' blood samples, which Aric had accessed through a covert medical database Lyra had never intended for him to see. The results were strange, genetic profiles that didn't quite match Lyra's. There were traces of a previous life encoded in their DNA. Someone else had been there. Someone who had died. The biological evidence was damning. The twins weren't her children by birth, not in the traditional sense. They shared no genetic link to Lyra beyond a superficial resemblance and a common Aurelian marker. But their cellular makeup matched the profiles of a pair of children from another house, a family that had tragically perished years ago in an accident. When Aric confronted Lyra with the evidence, she didn't try to deny it. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, her expression softened and her voice, normally so commanding, faltered for the first time. "They're not my children," she admitted, the weight of the truth settling between them. "But they were the closest thing I could ever have." Lyra explained that Aaron and Sori were not born of her flesh, but were rather replicas of her lost children, brought back through an advanced and controversial technology known as neural memory synthesis. This technology allowed for the copying of a person's memories, emotions, and thoughts, and then imprinting them into the bodies of genetic clones. The clones had no original experiences. They were empty vessels waiting to be filled with the minds of the dead. The decision to use this technology had been Lyra's alone. Her children had died in a tragic accident, and unable to cope with the loss, she had turned to science to preserve their essence. She had them recreated, not for the public, not even for herself, but because she couldn't bear the pain of their absence. The twins were her last connection to them. Roothart's strange psychic link with the twins made sense now. The root system, ancient and powerful, was attuned to the neural energy of the twins, drawing on the memory patterns encoded in their minds, as though it had recognized their essence as real. The heart of the planet had somehow connected to the clones, granting them an uncanny bond to its life force. But there was a darker side to the truth. The twins were living reminders of a tragedy, artificial in every way, and yet alive with memories of a life they never truly had. Their behavior, their instinctive knowledge, their bond to Roothart, it all stemmed from the recreated memories of Lyra's lost children. As Aric pondered the implications, he realized the psychological toll this secret had on Aaron and Sori. They were more aware of their origins than anyone realized. There were moments when they would speak as though they remembered things from before their birth, things that never happened to them, but had happened to the children whose memories they carried. The twins seemed to know more about Lyra's grief than any child should, and it burdened them in ways that were hard to explain. Their behavior wasn't just a product of their age. It was a direct result of the conflict between who they were and what they believed themselves to be. But it wasn't just Lyra who had known the truth. Isel, Aric suspected, had known too. There were whispers among the palace staff, and from the brief moments Aric had spent with her, he could see she had never fully trusted the twins' origins. The discovery raised a moral dilemma for Aric. He was faced with the choice of whether to expose this secret, whether to reveal the truth to the galaxy, knowing it would shatter the public's perception of Lyra and her children. It would strip away the illusion of a perfect family and, potentially, the stability of her political standing. But hiding the truth meant that the twins would continue to live with this lie, trapped in a world that couldn't see them as they truly were. If Aric revealed it, it would hurt them all, but at least the truth would be out in the open. However, the political ramifications were enormous. Lyra's entire position could be undermined. The Aurelian houses might demand her abdication. If he kept the secret, then Lyra would be protected. But the twins would live in the shadow of a false life, and that truth would eat away at them until they couldn't stand it anymore. Aric thought long and hard. His loyalty to Lyra, to Aurelian, and to the twins was tested in that moment. In the end, it wasn't just about what was right or wrong. It was about what would give the twins the best chance to live without the weight of a falsehood dragging them down. He decided to keep the secret for now, but he swore to himself that when the time came, the twins would know the truth of who they were. And when that time came, he would stand with them, no matter the cost. Aric knew that the fate of Aurelian depended on more than just weapons. He needed the twins to control the Root Heart's power. Their emotions had been the key to unlocking the planet's raw energy, but their volatility remained dangerous. Every burst of fear or anger triggered uncontrollable reactions from the roots, risking everything. To help them gain control, Aric focused on emotional discipline. He started with basic meditation techniques, deep breathing, calming exercises, and focusing their minds away from turbulent feelings. Breathe in slowly. Hold it. Now let it out. Empty your mind, he would say. The twins struggled, especially Erin, whose emotions were more erratic. Whenever she recalled her past life, memories she hadn't truly lived, chaos followed. However, as the sessions progressed, they improved. Erin began to control her energy longer, her once wild bursts turning into measured pulses. Sori, naturally more composed, quickly learned to harness the root's power with precision. The first breakthrough came when Erin, with intense focus, made the roots move toward her palm, gently, not violently. Sori controlled the light from the roots, shaping it into delicate patterns. Rootheart's response was more controlled, less erratic, yet Erin's temper remained a challenge. Whenever she became upset, the roots reacted fiercely. Aric knew patience was key, and progress, though slow, was real. Aric then turned his attention to the looming threat of Vale. The time to act was now. He couldn't face him with just the few loyal guards he had. He needed allies. Through Icel, Aric reached out to trusted soldiers and commanders within the Citadel, those who weren't swayed by Vale's influence. A small but loyal force was ready to fight. They armed themselves with plasma rifles, shock batons, and tactical gear, ready to fight in the narrow city streets where the real battle would be fought. Aric's strategy was clear: guerrilla tactics. He couldn't afford a full confrontation. Instead, he'd strike fast, cut off Vale's forces, and disrupt their command. The key was to separate Vale's mercenaries and isolate them one by one. Aric knew there was always a risk of betrayal. Some Aurelian nobles still sided with Vale, so he placed trusted soldiers in key positions and set up backup plans in case things went wrong. Then, the moment arrived. Lyra, in a rare moment of vulnerability, handed over control of the campaign. "You lead," she said, her voice steady but heavy with expectation. Aric felt the weight of her trust on him. She believed in him, but the pressure was immense. He now had to lead not only for the future of Aurelian, but for the safety of the twins. As the first light of battle broke across the Citadel, Aric prepared himself. The war was now his to fight. Vale and the Skath Corsairs launched their final assault on Rootheart through an underground passage, bypassing surface defenses and heading directly for the Rootheart. Their goal was to destroy the Rootheart and destabilize the Citadel. The Skath, causing chaos above ground, cleared the path for Vale's mercenaries to reach the heart of the city. Aric, anticipating the move, had set up a trap. His loyal forces lay in wait within the tunnels leading to the Rootheart. As Vale's mercenaries moved deeper into the Citadel, Aric's forces triggered explosive charges, blocking their path and isolating them in sections. However, this was just the beginning. Erin and Sori stood side by side, focusing on the Rootheart. The twins had become attuned to its energy. With synchronized breaths, they extended their hands, and the ground trembled. Massive beams of light shot from the roots, binding the mercenaries with glowing tendrils. The roots didn't attack, but they wrapped around the enemy's limbs and weapons, rendering them immobile. The mercenaries were trapped, unable to fight back. Vale's forces were thrown into chaos. The Skath, trained for brutal combat, struggled against the roots, unable to break free. The panic spread quickly as soldiers realized they were powerless against the roots' grip. Aric, positioned at the front lines, kept his focus on the battlefield, directing his soldiers to secure the perimeter. He knew his role wasn't to kill, but to ensure the mercenaries couldn't escape or regroup. As the battle reached its peak, Isel uncovered a hidden ledger containing Vale's illegal dealings. The records revealed his payments to the Skath for their involvement in the attack, exposing his true intentions. Armed with this evidence, Aric was able to present the truth that would bring Vale down. When Vale was captured, he showed little resistance. "You think this will save you?" he asked. But there was no defiance in his voice. The truth had already sealed his fate. The exposure of Vale's treason sent shockwaves through Aurelian. His support crumbled, and the Aurelian nobility turned their backs on him. The Skath's grip on the city loosened, and the remaining mercenaries were subdued by the roots. Aurelian had survived, not through violence, but by revealing the truth and securing peace. Aric's decision to keep the truth about the twins' origins hidden weighed heavily on him. He knew it was a choice made not for himself, but for the stability of Aurelian. Revealing their true nature could have shattered the political alliances, thrown the people into doubt, and destroyed any sense of unity. Aaron and Sori were the symbol of a fragile peace, and their false identity was essential in holding the kingdom together. For now, it was a secret that served a greater good. Lyra understood, and though she never voiced it, her silent gratitude was evident. She trusted Aric more than anyone else, and she knew he would protect the family even if it meant making difficult decisions. But as for the twins, Aric could never be sure if they fully understood the truth. They sensed something was hidden, but whether they comprehended the extent of their creation remained uncertain. In the quiet moments between them, Aric often wondered if they had questions, doubts they dared not voice. By keeping the secret, Aric ensured the political landscape of Aurelian remained stable. If the truth about the twins' origins were revealed, it could have ignited a scandal that would have shaken the core of Aurelian's rule. The political ramifications were too great to ignore. This fragile peace had to be preserved for the greater good of the kingdom. The blood oath ceremony was a grand affair, steeped in centuries of tradition. The chamber was adorned with intricate tapestries depicting the great history of the Aurelian people, battle victories, alliances, and the founding of their empire. The air was thick with incense, the light soft and golden as it filtered through crystal windows. It was a space where history and destiny intertwined. The Aurelian High Council, diplomats from distant worlds, and members of noble families filled the chamber. Lyra stood at the head of the hall, a regal figure clad in ceremonial armor, her face calm but resolute. Aric stepped forward to take his oath, his heart pounding in his chest. This moment would define his future and his connection to Aurelian forever. As Aric placed his hand on the ceremonial blade, the root system of Root-Heart lit up beneath their feet, an ethereal glow shining through the floor. Lyra's voice echoed through the hall as she recited the ancient words of the oath. The final moment came when Aric swore his allegiance to the Aurelian house. A symbol, a glowing seal of the blood oath, appeared on his arm, a brand that would remain with him as the eternal guardian. Aric's new role as the guardian was now official. The weight of this new responsibility settled on him. He was bound not only by blood, but by duty to the Aurelian people. His protection of Lyra and her family was now sacred, and the kingdom's survival rested on his shoulders. With Aric's oath, the Aurelian alliance grew stronger, united under the banner of a new leadership. The kingdom's foundations were set, and Aric was no longer just a soldier. He was the protector of the realm. As he stood at the head of the Aurelian forces, watching the roots of Root-Heart pulse with life, Aric couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. He had entered the war as a warrior, but he had emerged as something far greater, a symbol of unity and strength for Aurelian. The path ahead would be difficult, but the message was clear. Loyalty, sacrifice, and honor would carry them through. As the ceremony ended and the final oath was sworn, Aric stood in the heart of the citadel, the weight of his new title settling over him. The path ahead would be difficult, with challenges both from within and beyond Aurelian's walls. But with the blood oath now binding him to Lyra and the kingdom, Aric knew that his purpose was clear. He was no longer just a protector, but the shield that would hold the Aurelian realm together. The twins, his charge, and the key to Aurelian's future, were now at peace with their place in this world. As the roots of Root-Heart glowed beneath their feet, Aric's thoughts shifted to the next chapter. The battle for Aurelian had ended, but the war for its future had just begun.